Hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Educators Cooperative panel on anti-racist teaching, learning, and leading from the classroom. We are honored and grateful for your generosity, leadership, and scholarship, as well as with your time today. We're going to share detailed introductions about each of you when I send this link to all the people who will be watching this later today. But I do want to make sure that we're clear about how grateful we are for each of you for sharing your time. We ask teachers to share what is on their minds. What questions do they have when they walk into their classrooms every day, when they take their planning period and to think about their next lesson? What questions are front of mind? We ask them to share with us the topics that keep them up at night, about which they are curious and they want to learn about from you and from one another when we meet on Saturday. The topics range from things as broad as system level interest convergence to the granular day-to-day lesson planning, from early childhood education all the way to high school text choices and the importance of Black joy at every one of those intersections. I'd like to open up the floor broadly. You guys took some time to look at those questions and topics. Is there anything that stands out to you that you wish to begin or to address together here now or to start off? And that's open to anybody who'd like to start.
I will start just because there was one question that really stuck out to me, and I just put a star beside it. What advice would you give educators who are the only people of color in their buildings and feel pressure for the pressure of advocating for all students, but especially those students of color on their job? So one, I just want to acknowledge someone who's willing to be the only one. One of the reasons I chose to be an HBCU professor is because I just couldn't navigate what that would be like. So first, I just want to acknowledge whoever wrote that in, that when you are the only one, unfortunately, you become the spokesperson and you usually are under a microscope. And she said, what would I give as advice? One, I would say dig into your humanity, because what we all share is a certain level of humanity. Even though you're the only person of color in your building, we're all human beings navigating our lives and our priorities. So the first thing I would say is let's just connect on that human level. And I always frame my work around transforming education and anti-racist education in particular around my humanity, right? The reality is, as human beings, we don't want to do harm. Right? You know, doctors take that creed. I think teachers should actually take that same creed. When you choose to become an educator, do no harm. So anytime you're the only one and you feel that harm is being done, you can literally speak about it from that perspective. Like, did this serve a student? Did this serve me, or did this do harm? I think that's the way I enter these conversations, particularly with people who don't share my lived experience or my lived reality, but they share my humanity. And they may disagree around intent, right? I don't even have conversations about intent anymore. I have conversations about impact. We got to deal with the impact of what people do to people when they're the only one. So the way I would enter that is just human to human. Like we have a shared humanity and we have an agreement not to do harm. At least I would assume that. And then we can go from there having a real honest discussion about what are the implications of being the only one? When do you feel marginalized? What does that look like? I would share it from a perspective of you bringing your gifts that allow students to bring their gifts. Because if you're the only one and you're marginalized, you can only imagine what it's like for the students in your building. So that is my first cut at that advice. I have some more, but I'll stop there. That's where that was a question that just really hit me. And I just want to acknowledge whoever that is who's willing to be the only one. Like I said, I probably could now at my age now, but when I was first starting, I was like, oh no, I couldn't do that. So.
Well, I'd like to extend off of that question because I was in some ways the only one when I started teaching in 1968 in the school district of Philadelphia. You would think, oh, that can't be true in Philadelphia. Come on, it's a city that's, more than 40% Black. But the school district was under a desegregation order, not just for students, but for teachers. They were trying to get the teachers to be desegregated across the system. And so there were some schools that I couldn't choose because they had already too many Black teachers. So I ended up in a school in South Philadelphia. And maybe because I grew up in Philly, I knew I was going to a place that wasn't going to be welcoming. In fact, my entire family was like, oh my God, you going down there? I mean, people were frightened in my family that I was taking that job. And I did have people call me the N-word, and I'm not talking about kids. I'm talking about adults. I'm talking about parents telling me no N-word is going to teach my child. I guess I was prepared for that because I had parents who came out of the South who always said they don't want you there. You need to know that. So in some ways, I guess I developed a bit of a veneer that said, you know what, I'm just going to do this work and I'm not getting caught up in your mess. But I want to kind of pivot to some of the other questions that really take on questions about race and anti-racism, because what I'm starting to hear far too many times is this notion, well, how do we be anti-racist teacher? Or how do we do such as if it were different from anything else you're supposed to do. The most anti-racist radical thing you can do is teach these children to the highest standard.
That's right.
If I'm a physician, the most anti-racist thing I can do is make sure that a Black person coming in gets the highest quality of medical care. If I'm an attorney, the most radical anti-racist thing I can do is make sure that this Black client gets the highest quality of legal service. So if your job is to teach, and to teach to a high quality standard, the most radical anti-racist thing you can do is say, you know what, these Black children are going to learn this. These Black children are going to get the best of me. These Black children, and it's not this separate thing you do off to the side. And I think that's the challenge, that people think, oh, I've got to, culturally relevant, I got to do this over in addition to everything I have to do. No, it's the only thing you have to do. That's the work. And if you're not conceiving of it as the work, then you don't have it right.
She said that better than me. That's where I was talking about leading with your humanity. As you said it brilliantly. That's what I was saying.
If I could follow up on that, and for a better introduction of myself, Ashford Hughes, I serve in Nashville as the Chief Executive Officer for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion within our school district. Prior to that, I served 4 years in the mayor's office as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the city, and have a long background in community organizing and labor movement organizing and political work as well. One of the things that I want to piggyback off Dr. Billings is about my mantra within my office, which is fix injustice, not kids. And making certain that when we come into this space, we are not trying to always pit, well, we got to get kids right. We have to do this right. Especially those groups that have been marginalized or been at the margins of our support over time. Like, it is upon us to look at our personal processes, our institutional processes, and our professional processes to realize, like, we're not doing things right. The data is there. The data has been there over time to showcase the things that we're not doing correct. So when I talk about, and when the question was around Black joy, first and foremost, how are we getting to know who our students are? I come from an experience of having to be bused in high school from Knoxville, Tennessee, from the Black high school to the majority white high school, and knowing what the teacher that really brought me Black joy in school was an art teacher, because he allowed me and my friends that got bused to, during class, play music, talk about our experiences in the busing, talk about the dreams that we had, and every Black student he had resonated with him, and we would die for Mr. Sage. And to this day, we still go and talk to him on occasion whenever we're home, because he understood Black joy meant us expressing ourselves freely, being able to open up and tell him who we are. And he created that relationship with us, because he wasn't trying to fix us. He was trying to make certain that he knew how to connect with us, to teach us to the standard, but to use what we call now, what Dr. Billings has been leading, culturally responsive instruction, to be able to pull out the best in us. And I think oftentimes equity right now is the buzzword. 5-10 years ago, it was diversity and it was inclusion. And everybody is co-opting equity, but I always tell people equity and equality are two different things. People say equity, but they are really chasing equality. Equality is about sameness. Equity is about justice and fairness, and giving that personalized experience to our students. And this is not an add-on. It is something that should be what we do every day if we really are about education and making certain that every student, every day, whatever it takes, gets our best. And I'm hopeful that educators now in this space understand this is a must do if we truly care about what education is supposed to be about, which is about cultivating critical thinkers, not just getting people from the 9th grade, the 10th grade to the 11th grade, but creating cultural, competent thinkers that can go out into the world, question things, but also advocate for themselves, participate in the civic engagement of our communities to better our communities. And I'm hopeful that we have literature and we have data that is readily available that people can begin to read and digest in order to really understand what this work actually looks like.
Yep. I also think that Dr. Ellington's emphasis on our children's humanity, I'm telling you, far too many of our kids are sitting in classrooms where the person in charge of that classroom does not believe that those children are fully human. Just in the way they describe them. They don't believe they're fully human. We use labels to describe them. We say, oh, they're at risk. You know, I used to teach at Santa Clara University, which was an almost all white Catholic university in California. That campus had 5 Black faculty, not my department, the campus. And almost all of my students had never had a Black professor or teacher ever. And I began a class with them, and I said to them, I said, well, you know, this class is going to be tough for you, and it's going to be tough for me. I said, because I'm not used to teaching at-risk students. Who is she talking about? You know, you could hear that. But I proceeded to use that term in describing them for the next 5 or 6 minutes. Going through the syllabus, I know it's a lot of reading. I realize you're at risk, but I'm committed. I'm going to work in, I'm going to hang in there with you. Yeah, I know these assignments are going to come one after another, and I realize you're at risk. But you know what? I'm going to do my best because I don't want you. And so finally, one of the young men in the classroom raised his hand. I called on him. I said, yes, sir. He said, you know, I'm deeply offended at your constant referring to us as at risk. I said, oh, you are you? You've been at risk all of 5 minutes and you pissed off. Now, think about these people who send you the most precious commodity they have, their babies. And you tell them at 5 they're at risk and expect them to carry that label for the next 13 years and be successful. The truth of the matter is, to be human is to be at risk. I'm at risk for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, you know, COVID, I guess. We're all at risk for COVID, but we're not walking around with a sign on our chest saying, I'm at risk. So when we stop seeing our kids with these labels of deficiency, of what they can't do, you know, many people, of course, saw the most recent inauguration, and everybody was raving about Amanda Gorman. And I've been telling teachers and folks since that inauguration, Amanda's outstanding, but Amanda is not extraordinary. Do you know how many Amanda Gormans are out there? And I can say this because I picked that young lady. I was on the panel that picked her to be the 2017 US Poet Laureate. There was a bunch of really good people. Amanda just happened to have a more compelling story. She had a disability. She had 2 disabilities to overcome. One was stuttering, one was a cognitive processing thing. But every state sends these kids to compete in these Poet Laureate. In fact, I remember the Nashville one because I knew her dad. And I asked him, I said, do I need to recuse myself? They said, no, just read her poetry. We got thousands of kids like Amanda Gorman, but you can't see that. because what you're looking for is that at-risk kid.
And Dr. Billings, I gotta say something here, because that was the conversation that I was in when I actually was a doctoral student, and I was a math major. When I was a math major and I was Black, people would ask me all kind of questions about where I went to school. And I went to a DC public school, nothing special. And I would tell people I was a math major, and everybody would look at me like I was crazy or I was special. And one of the things I was interested in is I got irritated, like, no, I'm not special, right? This idea that when you're in STEM disciplines or you're doing something extraordinary, particularly as a Black woman from the city, I was special. And so I shared this in my TED Talk. I was talking about this idea that I was like, it would annoy me to think I was special. And what hit me was, when you frame people's experiences through a deficit lens, anybody who rises above that is considered special. The problem is the lens we're using. It has nothing to do with I'm special, you're special. It's about we don't expect that to be the case. So that led me to my dissertation work, where I talked to high achieving students and really started to ask them, what was it that had you be high achieving? And at the time, there was no studies that talked about high achieving Black children in math at the time. Now there are more, people are moving in that direction. But I thought it was just interesting. And as a doctoral student, I was like, I'm really not special, y'all. I mean, like, really. Because a lot of my friends in the hood way brighter than me, and just took different choices, made different choices. So I just thought this wanted to add to that it's the way and the framing that we have certain people be special. And to me, that is a racist ideology. When you start specializing exceptional people because you don't expect them to be exceptional,
right?
To be good, even I'm not even go to exceptional.
Right.
But to be competent and to persist in disciplines like mathematics or engineering, and how people be like, girl, you was a math major. Oh, you special. What, you a genius? I'm like, no, I'm not a genius. I'm just a person who chose to take this path. So that I just had to say that it just would annoy me. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so I just had to share that. It's the way we're seeing kids that, and it's a cultural conversation. Think about it. Part of being in the American culture is really a racist context. When I did a talk maybe 3 weeks ago, and somebody said, well, Roni, how do you know you're racist? I said, well, if you're not actively undoing your racist perceptions, you're racist. Because it's not personal though. It's the water we swim in. I look at it like a fish. If you put a fish in a fishbowl, it's going to get wet. We're all wet with that ideology. So you have to actively dry off and start to interrogate yourself in ways that you might not be comfortable with. And then another thing, I'm sick of this conversation about comfort. I tell people, if I did what was comfortable, you would not see me here. Now, I definitely believe in peace, but I don't necessarily believe in comfort, because when you're always on the skinny branches, forwarding an ideology that is not the status quo, you're going to be uncomfortable. Get used to it, but you can still be at peace.
Right.
Knowing that you're doing the work. And I say it's God's work. I'm spiritual, so it's God's work to bring a level of humanity to all children and to all people. So that's why I always start there. So I said a lot, but this comfort thing, and everybody always, well, how can I be an advocate for the students and be comfortable? I'm like, if we wait, and Black people who was fighting for freedom, if they said, oh, I gotta be, we wouldn't be here. I don't get that. Yeah, anyway, I'm sorry. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But this comfort thing, we got to give up the comfort for the peace. The peace that passes all understanding. Because when you're standing on the right side of history and you actually are forwarding something that matters to you, you can be peaceful even as people are uncomfortable. I told somebody, nobody died of being uncomfortable. You'll make it. But stand in what's true and stand in what's real for you and forward that one step at a time. And that's how you get past it. And people get over it. They'll either get over it or they'll do what they do. But don't make yourself uncomfortable trying to fit because you're trying to do something that's not yours to do. So that's all I have.
I think the lived reality that undergirds everything you great scholars have just talked about here in Nashville is that we don't know how to talk about race in Nashville, and we refuse to talk about race. As a matter of fact, we kind of tiptoe around it for that comfort. We'll talk about every other level of difference besides race, right? We can talk LGBTQ issues, students with disabilities. As soon as we talk about race, everybody personalizes it. Well, I'm not racist, but my family didn't do that. Well, why do I have to pay for those sins of those individuals? But we really haven't assessed race in the historic context. I know that we were all shared an article that Dr. Billings wrote several years ago that really speaks to the history. The history is plain. Even in Nashville in the late 1950s, one of our schools was bombed by a known segregationist because of the Brown versus Board of Education and trying to integrate the schools. That was just 60 years ago, but people don't know that we are very ahistorical to know that from the time of enslavement to Jim Crow to now the new Jim Crow, we have been more in an oppressive state than out of it. And that is a lived reality that many of our students come into contact with, but because we do not address that head on, everybody's all of a sudden tired to talk about race, but we aren't talking about it. We aren't really facing it head on. And until we as educators, our school district is 70% African-American and or Latinx, Hispanic, New Americans, and it's 26% white. And we will not have conversations about race in a major way in our school that really addresses that Black joy, that understanding of where our students are coming from. I also am the co-chair of our My Brother's Keeper Network here with a colleague of mine that we both graduated from Tennessee State. So we pour back into young men, especially on the reading piece. And that literacy piece, I find oftentimes that we try to box students in, just like I was trying to be boxed into reading To Kill a Mockingbird, to read all these novels. When I went home, I wanted to read the Source magazine. I wanted to read Jet magazine because that's what my grandmother had all around the house. We incorporate the same learnings to our young men that you don't always have to read one of these fancy novels that don't have you in the storyline. You can read those things that help you to incorporate the vocabulary, the language, but find something that resonates with you to be able to read. But that is how we help them out. Right now, we need an outlet to really address race in our schools, race in our city construct, but no one is willing to have that conversation. Nashville is very Nashville nice. We go to the meetings, we smile and say, yeah, we're gonna work on that. And we're gonna do Black Lives Matters. And then as soon as we hit the parking lot, man, you know what that son of a gun said? I'm not gonna do none of that. We have to address race head on. We have to make certain that we can have an honest conversation about history, about the data. We have to humanize the data that shows us the history of racism and our outcomes. And then we have to then do something with the data. Oftentimes we look at data in every facet, but what are we doing with the data to address the outcomes we say we want to have happen, addressing Black and brown students in our schools? And I don't see us right now in the South, in Nashville, doing that expressly. And that is the next step for us to really move into a place where we can say we really are a culturally responsive, culturally competent school district, when we can actually address race and not feel worried that everybody's going to say, see, he's bringing in that CRT stuff. We just don't believe in that CRT stuff. So you're telling me you don't believe in history. You don't believe in what has taken place before now, right? And we have to stop letting those individuals that haven't done the research, haven't done the scholarship, outlining what the measures are, right? We know what this is, and we know that the theory stipulates oppression is in everything that we do. Like you said, Dr. Ellington, it's in the water. It's in everything that we do. How we address it and how we take it on shows to me if we're serious about this work or not.
Well, I will tell you that everything south of the Canadian border is the South. So don't think we have anything special going on up here in Wisconsin. Listen, we're watching a trial that is happening in Minnesota. You can't get any nicer than Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Minnesota Nice, right? So, and not only did we're watching that trial, there's another kid that gets killed last week. Where? In Minnesota. So it is not about where we are, as long as we are in this culture. I've lived in California, I've lived in Philadelphia, I've lived in Seattle. It's everywhere. It is the water in which we swim. I could not help but notice that a number of the questions take on STEM. And I want to suggest to you that the idea that STEM or STEAM, whichever acronym you are using, is not separate. We are in the most highly technological, scientifically sophisticated era the world has ever seen. And our kids are in the midst of it. First of all, our kids are so technologically savvy, but we don't count what they do. See, I can MC, but I can't DJ. I can't spin them right. I don't know how to coordinate them, on the ones and twos like that. But I know whatever it is that D Nice is doing, it involves some technological knowledge and skill. But we will not bring that in. I did a workshop for some STEM teachers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a couple years ago, about 3 years ago now. The first question I asked them is, I said, how many of you have seen Black Panther? About 80% of them raised their hand. I said, now if 80% of you have seen it, let me tell you, 95% of your kids have seen it. Particularly if you're teaching Black kids, because we made that an event. We had outfits for Black Panther. We didn't just buy a ticket. We got dressed up for that. So I asked them, I said, how many of you have used Black Panther to spur conversations about STEAM in your classroom? Nobody. I said, well, we're going to do it right now. I used the acronym STEAM. I said, tell me, as you recall Black Panther, where did you see examples of science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics? We filled the board. Then I said, how many chemistry teachers I have in the room? I had about 8 of them. I said, okay, here's the prompt. If vibranium is an actual element, where does it fit on the periodic chart of elements? Because if you can answer that question, you understand the periodic chart. Just memorizing the chart ain't gonna help you. I memorized it. Here's the problem. I memorized it in 1965. There's a whole bunch of stuff on there now that wasn't on there in 1965. But if you understand that how many protons, electrons, and neutrons you have to have, if you understand whether it's a gas or a liquid, whether it's a metal, whether it's salt, then you understand how the chart works. And that's really what we want our kids to know, not just to memorize things, but to understand how things work. If you think that our kids are not interested in, quote, STEM or STEAM, then you haven't spent any time with our kids. I did a mini study with preschool and kindergartners. I asked them 2 questions. Tell me what you want to know about yourself, and tell me what you want to know about the world. I will tell you that 90% of the questions that these babies ask are science questions. Why is my shadow big at this part some days, and sometimes it's little? Okay, we're all into the solar system. We're all into, where we are in relation to the sun. Another question, how many stars in the sky? Okay. You can't tell our babies, nobody can count them, because that's what somebody's job really is. There are astronomers out there that make estimation. Okay, math people, yes. What does estimation look like? That's the kind of questions that our kids have. Why are the leaves green in the summer, but then they turn a different color and fall down? Now we're going to talk about deciduous trees. The things that our kids are most interested in are STEM related things, and we think they're not. Now, what you want to teach them probably isn't really STEM. You're going to teach them how to read about something as opposed to how to experience that something. So I've been saying over and over, that, I know people are anxious about what's going on with COVID and this whole thing about we can't wait to get back to normal. No, let's not go back to normal, because normal was where the problem was. I'm avoiding normal at all costs. I'm ready to go to new. And so for me, going to new is stop teaching in these little discrete pieces of information that don't make any sense to anybody. Now let's have kids investigate real issues, real problems. And I've been developing curriculum models for people that like ask the big question, like, what does migration mean to a species? I got my science there. I definitely got my mathematics there. I got all kinds of books. I got the Grapes of Wrath because they were migrating. I got Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns. That's my parents' generation, migrating from South Carolina to Philadelphia. That's what people do. People migrate. So people as a species migrate. Animals as species migrate. What does it? That's a great question, a big question that cuts across everything we want to teach. But as long as we want to teach, I'm in this little box over here teaching reading, and I'm going to be in this box over here teaching mathematics, and I'm going to teach, and not understanding the context that this stuff happens in. I'll say one last thing. I did the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics keynote address for them the last time they met in San Diego. So it's been about 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
And I asked them a question. I put up a slide that said 4 plus 3 equals ? I said, what does this mean? Well, people yelling out 7, 7. I said, I didn't ask you I didn't ask you to solve the problem. So what does it mean? Oh, people are going to tell me about 4 units and 3 units. And I said, no, it doesn't mean anything because it doesn't have a context. If it's 4 apples and 3 oranges, what is that? Okay, there's no thing called an apple orange. Now you might want to raise it up conceptually and say, it's 7 pieces of fruit. But if I'm 8 years old, I might not have that yet. And if it's 4 mice and 3 snakes, maybe it's only 3 snakes. And if one of them snakes is bigger than all the other, maybe it's just 1 snake. You need a context to understand mathematics. And our kids are being fed decontextualized things as if they meant something. And when they don't respond in ways that we want them to respond, then we say that they're at risk. They have deficits. They have learning gaps. No, they're saying what you're trying to ask me don't make no sense.
Yep.
Gloria, that's a drop the mic. I don't know if this is the end of the panel. Like, I just feel like I'm on here with Gloria Ladson Billings. And you just laid the whole law all the way. And as a mathematician, classically trained, I'm going to tell you why we don't do it. Because the context is messy and nobody wants to deal with the mess. They don't want to contextualize because then you'll have to deal with the student. It's the thing I used to tell faculty. They always say, I teach in higher ed and I teach math. I said, no, you don't. You don't teach math. You teach students mathematics.
Mathematics, right.
See, the decontextualizing of the work allows you to ignore the student.
And if you're in K-12, what you're teaching is a school subject.
Yes.
Called mathematics. You're not teaching math.
That's right.
You're teaching a school subject. We have distilled it and made it and packaged it in a way. Again, decontextualized. One of my favorite contextualized math examples is my friend Bill Tate. I had Bill come to my class once when we used to work together in Wisconsin. Bill put 2 fractions on the board. One fraction said 1 over, I'm gonna just guess, 47. And the other fraction was like 1 over 4,321. Bill again said, what does this mean? Well, my students, they're bright. They're the state's best students. So they're going to talk about numerators and denominators and one portion of such a, and he says, it doesn't mean anything. You don't have a context. He said, now let me give you context. During enslavement, it was against the law to knowingly sell an enslaved African who was insane. You couldn't sell somebody who was crazy. The 1 over 47 is the percentage of insane slaves in the state of Maine. The 1 over 4,321 is the percentage of insane slaves in Louisiana. Now, what does this mean? Okay, it means if you're in Louisiana, you ain't gonna be crazy. I'm telling you, because the whole industry is wrapped around selling these people. or believing you can sell people. Whereas in Maine, it's not that profitable to be engaged in direct slavery. So yeah, you're looking at people and say, oh, that person's not quite right. No, oh, you couldn't sell that person. You need the context. And what we have to do in our teaching is provide our students with real context for understanding what it is we're trying to teach.
I think that comes back to Ashford earlier talking about how you wanted to run home and read Source magazine and read other magazines, where as an English teacher, I want to be able to have you read a text and tell me the main idea and tell me the theme that's present perhaps. And there's a risk, certainly goes back to the comfort part, where I have power as a teacher, as a male teacher, as a white male teacher, where I might not want to have to do the learning and discomfort of learning about Source magazine. So I'm going to say, no, we're only going to stick with these novels, with this list of the canon we're going to stick to. But the choice I can make in my classroom would be to say, this is going to be the relinquishment of some power and perhaps some face and some ego. I'm going to wade into waters. I'm going to pick up a Source magazine and try to understand right alongside with you. Because it's not as if you were reading those magazines and didn't understand the ideas. You understood them like better than anybody else. So it's just like you're describing, Dr. Billings, you're applying that context and saying, you can do this skill here we can do it there. And that sort of, that is uncomfortable perhaps for teachers, or a system that rewards hierarchy and power and comfort, as opposed to learning to understand what the need of each learner is. Sorry to put myself in there, but I heard all those dots.
Let me give you a real life context example from me as a student. Here I am in 6th grade. We're doing fractions. The word problem is a recipe, right? 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of something else. And then I come across a line in that recipe that says 1/4 teaspoon of alum, A-L-U-M. I raise my hand. I'm a good student. I'm one of the best students in the class, according to what the teacher says, right? The teacher says, what is it? I said, what is alum? She says, it doesn't matter, just do the problem. No, when you're 10 years old, it matters. I sat there staring at that problem for the rest of the math period. I'm like, I don't know what this thing is. Is it wet? Is it dry? You know, it's like mercury that's kind of beat up and put. I was so bothered by that, not knowing what that alum was, I couldn't do the problem. Now, the funny part of this is that now in my spice cabinet, I got about 3 things of alum, because every time I go in the store, I'll buy it. I've never used it, you know, but it's like, oh, that's what this is. Why she couldn't tell me? Now what I figured out is she probably ain't know herself, but that's how important context is to a learner. It is not just do the problem or just complete the assignment or just read the book. You need a context for understanding. So if I were still teaching some English classes, I used to teach social studies and English at the middle school. There are certain books that I would have kids, I'm gonna let you read the canon, but I'm not gonna let you read it alone without something else to put beside it. If we're gonna read Julius Caesar, we're probably gonna look at a couple episodes of The Wire. Okay, because I want you to see what ambition looks like, blind ambition. I want you to see what it looks like when you can't trust the people around you. Or we're going to read Julius Caesar. We're going to see a couple episodes of The Sopranos. Because again, I got somebody who is trying to, take over, be in charge, but he can't trust the people around him. Shakespeare is not good because he's some white guy from Stratford-on-Avon. He hit on some human themes, getting back to our humanity. And so let's see that theme play itself back over again in a more contemporary setting. I'm not someone who thinks you should throw stuff out of the canon. I think you should expand the canon and challenge the canon. Yeah, I'm going to let you read Heart of Darkness, but I'm not going to let you read it by itself. You're not going to read Conrad by itself. You're going to read it right next to Chinua Achebe. And we're going to ask the question, how can we have 2 people who claim to have had an experience in Africa have such different interpretations of what's happening on the continent? that gets back to Ashford's point about we want the kids to be able to ask critical questions. They're asking them, we just don't answer them. We just tell them just study because it's going to be on the test. That's the stupidest reason to study anything.
I think that goes to some of the questions around the professional development and what does the new professional development look like? Right now, everything, and we're in a red state, so everything is traced back to what the state is kind of looking at and what teachers are assessed on, what students are graded to, and their professional development is not what we need right now. Professional development also is what we've done is a check the box. We want to be, we want to make sure we have implicit bias training, one training a year check. We want to make certain that we understand culture. We're going to have a Hispanic month this week. We're going to do this check, and that check the box is really not serving our students, right? So what we're trying to do is, I know we're using a lot of reimagine, but we need to dismantle the old formation of professional development to allow teachers to critically think and then to figure out a way to how do I connect with our students. One of the things that I've been working with some of our teachers on here is how much time do you spend getting to know your students? How much time at the beginning of the year, not when it's almost Christmas time and everybody's families are coming in, but at the beginning of the year, how much time do you put in your planning to get to know the students, get to know the families, and how often do you show up at community events where many of your students live, right? That's how you build trust. When we're in the schools right now, we have a program called The Color of Voice, where myself and several other African-American men go in with some of our high schools to work with young Black and brown boys, addressing their student voice. How do we give them agency in the work that they want to do? Some of the things they tell us is that, hey, I'm here in school, but the teachers don't respect us. The teachers don't really engage us in a way that makes us want to be in the classroom. We're here, but the only one that understands us are you guys, because we can see where you come from. We see some of you all out in the community, and we trust you enough to tell you this. Right. And I think our teachers have to move beyond the construct of, I'm here just to be a science teacher. At 4 o'clock, I'm gone. I'll see them tomorrow. We had these students for 13 years. Right. We had 13 years. We are cultivating the next generation of what our cities look like. If we don't take a concentrated effort to get to know them, to pour into them, to do what you said in this book, Dr. Billings, education, like electricity, needs a conduit, a teacher through which to transmit its power, then you're going to have kids, Black and brown kids, and white kids for that matter, that are sitting in a classroom, bored, just waiting to get out, to take a test, to go on to hopefully college, to maybe a trade school, or if not, they're going to be at our doors in a different way that we don't want them at our doors. So their professional development is key to what we're actually trying to do in the new era and creating that new norm of what K through 12 should look like.
So when the pandemic first hit, I was visiting some schools remotely. I visited a high school in Baltimore. And of course, the question I had for the kids was how were they coping with remote learning? And to my surprise, this one young man told me, he said, "Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it." I said, "Really?" I said, what do you like about it? He said, "Look, when them people get on my nerves, I just close them off. I just shut them off." And I said, "Well, then what happened?" She said, "Oh, they call me on the telephone. And I just tell them I'm having internet connectivity problems." But what he was really saying is that for the first time, I am in total control of my learning. See, because when I cut them off in school, putting up my hoodie, putting my head down, they kicked me out.
Yep.
He said, but when I've had enough of them in this electronic format, I just got to push this little button here and be gone. That to me was like just eye-opening, because the kids are telling us, look, I want to have some control in my learning. I want to be able to say what's important to me. We never seem to ask them that. We just expect for them to take whatever we are dishing out.
Dr. Ladson, you bad. That's all I got to say. But this, you said a lot. I can't even talk now because you hit it. I mean, this idea was funny. Somebody asked me to do some work with them. It was an exchange program. And one of the things I said was, they was like, well, what should we be doing for the students and what the students. I said, well, do you have any student that you've actually put on this committee with us? And they kind of looked at me and was like, that's a good idea. And the same question I asked when I was a doctoral student, we keep talking about what's going to make a difference for students, but we don't even talk to them.
Right.
I thought that was odd. Like, well, they would be able to best tell us what would work for them, correct? Now, I would have some insight, but I would defer to them because they are the ones we're trying to impact. So anyway, and then that brings me to the professional development. We do the same thing to teachers as well. Right. So this whole marginalization, disempowering, because we're doing schooling, y'all. We're not doing education. So let's just call a thing, right? We schooling people. In the hood, we used to say, you know what, was you schooled on this? That's what we doing. We're doing hood schooling out here. We're not really doing education. Can we call a thing and not be professional? I'm just going to call it like it is. So this idea of schooling people, what we're schooling them into is the white supremacist hierarchical system that we want them to just fly right and be a part of. Let's just call that what it is. Right. Now, we don't want to admit that, but that's what we're doing. And so the brother who said, I can cut you off and be okay and just say, he brilliant, because that's what he don't want to be schooled in that way. Right. And so this whole idea of one leaving out the voices of students, when in fact they're the ones that we're saying we're accountable to, and we're holding everybody accountable for their performance, yet they're nowhere involved in what it is we're doing. Kids can talk about anti-racism better than me. I had a graduate student doing a practicum, and she had looked at Danny Martin's work, and she wanted to bring this whole racialized experience to some work she was doing in her classroom. And I visited her classroom. And when I heard these AP calculus students, these Black students, talk about how they were marginalized in ways that they were calling it racist, they knew what was going on. That when they were selected to the AP class, they were given this little corner that they had to be in, but the white students had a particular experience that was different than theirs. When they would get problems right, they would be questioned in a certain way that others didn't get questioned. So kids already know the game, because they know they've been schooled and they know what the deal is. The question is, are we going to bring them into the conversation when we start talking about what does anti-racist teaching, learning, and leading look like? It's about so what, so anyway, go ahead, Dr. Scott.
I was just going to say, but your point about asking the kids, I'm working with a group of instructional coaches here in Madison, and I'm trying to get them to formulate what I'm calling a commitment letter. Because when I asked them, I said, what's your job as an instructional coach? Well, they're all over the place. Some of them are yard supervisors. Some of them got to do the lunch supervisor. Some of them are the quasi principals. And I'm like, I don't think that's what your job description is. You're supposedly an instructional coach. So you need to lay out what it is you're going to do. And I said, I got this idea from when I was a classroom teacher. My colleagues would send home letters at the beginning of the year. I miss so-and-so, I'm Mr. So-and-so, I'm your child's teacher. I need your child to be on time. I need your child to have their supplies. I need you. And I finally said one time, everybody's working on their letters. I said, well, what are y'all going to do? I said, because this letter's all about what do you want the parents and the kids to do? They said, well, what do you mean? I said, you've made no commitment. My letter says, this is Mrs. Billings. I'm so excited to have your youngster in my class this year. Here are the things you can expect of me. I will be here. I'm not someone to take off very much time. If I am not here, I am really sick, or I have been required to go to some kind of professional development. I will be here early. So if you're someone who has start your day early, you feel free to come and see me. I will be here late. I will probably be someone that will be hanging, one of the last teachers to leave. Here's how you get in touch with me. You should expect before the month end to receive a phone call from me so that I can just check in. And I can tell you that those parents would tell me, you're the first teacher ever called that it wasn't no problem. So this, I'm making my commitment is what I'm saying.
Yep.
And I'm not, all I'm hearing is what we're demanding of kids, what we're demanding of their parents, what we're demanding of their language, what we're demanding of their culture. I don't understand what it is that we're willing to do.
I think that speaks to one of the questions about cultural appropriation and what that looks like in the classroom, and the teacher that was kind of fearful of not doing the right thing, saying the right words. I think ask the student. I think Google is free. Everybody has Google enough to know what's relevant, what's culturally responsive or not. But ask the students, it's okay to make mistakes. We're so fearful of making mistakes because we'll look bad, or we feel like somebody's checking us or grading us on everything. Ask the student, hey, I would like to do a lesson on this, but I don't know it all. Can you help me get there so we can bring everybody into the lesson? I think we have to quit being fearful of asking students. I believe in the second Holy Trinity. The first one, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. The second one is family, student, teacher. And how are the three of those working together to solve the complex issues in the classroom? And we all know what cultural appropriation and misinformation looks like, right? We can look at Chuck Berry, then we look at Elvis Presley. We can go on, we can look at, hey, we're saying politicians, rap is bad, but rap sells McDonald's, Sprite, Coca-Cola, Toyota, everything you want to go down the line. I just think we have to make it up in our minds. How are we centering ourselves and creating the new norms? How will we take what's available to us? We don't have to go, and I salute those that get their PhDs. Again, Google, we have books, we have people with lived experience all around us to be able to ask and give us the tools to be successful in the classrooms that we need. I specifically subscribe to what Karen Hunter and Dr. Greg Carr at Howard University are doing with narrative. It gives practical tools that you can learn history and get more readings to continue to do your learning on. I think teachers that are really serious about being anti-racist, being more culturally responsive and understanding, have to do the work. And they have to do it over a period of time. We are in the microwave society, but this is not going to happen. You don't take 2 implicit bias lessons and now you know racism, now you solved it, right? It's over a period of time. But if you aren't able to sit down and reflect and center yourself in this work, I don't think it'll come through for you. Oftentimes I find in education, everybody is in the next thing to do. We're busy. We're so busy that we don't take time to sit down and strategize, to plan out our next steps. We're going to the next meeting, the next session, to do this next thing, but we're not doing what's essential. And we're not connecting everything back to the most essential target that we have, which is that student.
So we began the session before recording by asking what last thing people had listened to. Every class that I have a playlist for. And the playlist is comprised of songs that the students bring to me. I have a criteria. It cannot be racist. It cannot be misogynistic. It cannot be homophobic. I mean, there's certain things that I'm not going to endorse. You can listen to whatever you want to through your own personal headset, but as a part of our community, there, we got a bar. So bring me the clean version of whatever it is you want to hear, because they usually do both. There's a radio version and then there's the explicit version. When I started doing that, lateness dropped by 60%. I gotta get this. You might play my song with that. Now the song's on shuffle, right? So it's not like one after the other. People want to hear their song. I also inserted other music that they normally wouldn't be exposed to in there. And they'd be like, oh, what's that? And I never forget when I had a kid say to me, I said, let me put the playlist on, because I'll put it on low, while we're just reading silently. And this one kid said to me, Miss Billings, can you put that song on? It was like, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. I said, Beethoven's Fifth. That's my John. I love that song. Now he would never have heard that song, except that I slipped it in the playlist, and we could have a conversation. And so, people talk about appropriation. No, you're there to. Learning is reciprocal. You're teaching, but you're also learning. And if you think it's just one way, then you really don't have an understanding of what teaching and learning is all about. It is always, the teacher always walks away learning more than the students. It's just the way it is.
And it
And I
has
would
to
like to-
matter, Doctor. It just has to matter enough to rise to the level of commitment. When you said that, Dr. Bill, it really got me thinking. Something you're just interested in is not rising to the level of a commitment. That's a different level of intention, a different energetic, a different whole game. People are interested in stuff. Oh, it's a good idea. They're not committed. That's why they're not willing to write a letter to say what you can be counted on to do, because it's not a real commitment. It's a, if it's convenient and I feel like it and all the stars align and I'm going to not be, right? It's all of that. So a commitment is
or it's a problem that the teacher cares about. Oh, I'm so into the rainforest. Can I tell you how many rainforest projects I've seen? And I asked the kids, I said, well, where's the rainforest? They said, I don't know. It's something she want to study. I need us to listen to kids. One of the best problem-centered lessons I ever saw, and it's something I probably would have never done. The kid came in, high school kid, mad, saying that the school's hat rule wasn't fair. And the teacher said, are you just saying that, or do you have evidence? He said, well, I get stopped. They want to suspend me. So she says, yeah, but that's you. Let's do something with that. And she divided her class into fours. One group did freshmen, one did sophomores. They developed a survey. They surveyed kids in their group, put the demographic information, male, female, race or ethnicity. Have you ever been stopped about wearing a hat? Yes or no? What happened? When they compiled that data and put together them histograms, it was true. If you are Black and male wearing a hat, you're getting suspended. Now that wasn't just, and so while the teacher probably suspected it to be true, it was the kid's ability to use the tools of her class to conduct the survey. They did a report. They presented it to the administration. They said, this is what y'all are doing. Fortunately, they had a aware enough administrator who took it to the teachers. He said, this is the data that the students have presented us with. We have a rule, but we're not applying it equitably, right? We're always picking on certain kids.
Yep. I think there's an elephant in the room too that we have to address at some time. While lived experience as Black, brown people does give us a particular understanding about race in real time, it doesn't always make us experts in race, critical race theory, and understanding how to solve for the issues that we're involved with. So I think there's still some learning from even our Black educators on really in certain levels how to connect the things that we need to do. And I know that's not something we always speak about, because some people may be like, hey, I'm gonna go to Ashford, it's a Black guy from East Knoxville projects, he knows what it is. And I may never, know what they're talking about. But that's something that we have to continue to learn.
And I try to remind people, I'm not anti-tests. I am not. I think the tests tell us something, but they don't tell us everything.
Yep.
If the test told us everything, then the best drivers in this society are 16 years old. Because they took the test and they passed. And all of y'all know them people cannot drive. None of them can drive.
Well, it goes back to the question, I think you said it, Dr. Ellington, or we've been talking about it. What is our vision for education going forward? Do we have a clear vision? We hear a lot of rhetorical context about all kids matter and we want to have the best education, but what are our actions showing? How do we make certain that not only our words, our actions, our resources, our time are spent cultivating these people's minds, these young people's minds, and not just preparing them to work at lower than minimum wage job just to get them along the way? What is our vision? Who do
you see when you look into a classroom?
Yep.
I remind teachers all the time that Martin Luther King's third grade teacher did not get all kind of goosebumps when he came in, and she didn't go, oh my God, it's Martin Luther King. She said, that's Martin King. He's a PK, a preacher's kid. so I know he's gonna be a mess, right? Because
Yeah.
we can't see. That's the beauty of our work. We can't know who's in the classroom. And so the excitement about the work is trying to discover who those young people are.
And then discover who you are. See, I think it's a self-discovery both ways, because I think you made a good point, brother, when you said, just because I'm Black and I grew up a certain way doesn't mean I understand the lived realities of my students. And I learned that the hard way, because the students would school me. Miss Ellington, you don't know about that. And I'd be like, what I don't know about? And they would be like, you off, you know what I mean? So there's a self-discovery both ways. It's never one way. And I think Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings said it brilliantly. It is a exchange that's occurring. If you're not transforming from that experience and that exchange, then you're not growing. So how are you going to cultivate someone else's growth and development if you're not ongoingly developing yourself and being able to interrogate your beliefs and values on a regular basis? And if you ain't doing that work, you can't cultivate that in someone else.
And we also need to have better ways, more robust ways, more varied ways of assessing when kids understand something. It's not always a paper and pencil test. I have a beautiful video of a young man who did a spoken word piece for his final assignment with me. And people were like, you going to accept that? I said, yeah, because it reflects everything we've covered. That young man took that piece and entered it into the Raise Up Foundation competition on stopping school dropout and won a national contest off of that piece. Now, if I had said, nope, you got to do a conventional 15, 20 page term paper, he would not have had the ability, or the opportunity to express what he was really taking from the experience. So until we get to a place where our kids are allowed to bring their whole selves into a classroom, whether they can represent what they know artistically, musically, in their own bodies and dance, whether it is digitally, our kids are so talented on these devices. We have got to give them more opportunities to demonstrate their understanding.
And it's funny, we do that in STEM. As a math teacher, I was the first faculty member to have my students, I was teaching calculus. Now, everybody thinks calculus, it's calculus. I have my students write papers and do performances, right? What is the story of calculus? From the beginning, when we talk about limits, to all the way up to integration. What's the story? And they were like, and this was like most of them, I said, I want you to tell me the story in your language. When we talk about calculus and we talk about instantaneous rate of change, that's all it is, by the way. It's a whole bunch of other stuff, but it's really instantaneous rate of change. And they were able to talk about, from limit to integration, what that story meant. That mattered so much more to them than me giving them 1,000 problems on how to integrate this or how to find a derivative. That didn't really make a difference. But when I asked them to contextualize the story of calculus and bring in all of the things they learned, the mean value theorem, the fundamental theorem of calculus, why it's fundamental, how it fits into the story. Some of them did research on calculus, which is a relatively new body of work, and they started to look at it from a historic context. It changed the game, and it was calculus. This wasn't just, you read it. It was calculus, and most of them were scared. And so I say that context, it matters no matter what you're teaching. This ability to have students be able to express what things mean to them. But again, you have to be willing to go into the context. You got to be willing to disrupt what you think students should be able to do in certain cases, or the way they do it, not even what they do, but how they do it.
Right.
And it was amazing. My department chair was like, Roni, I didn't know they understood. I was like, yeah, because you never asked them. You never asked them what the story of calculus was. You just asked them to do all these problems.
Right.
But they don't know. But now that they knew the story, we could literally talk about every skill we can put in the context of the story. I would give them problems I didn't even know how to do. I'm very courageous. I'm quick to find a problem I don't know how to do and be like, I don't know how to do this, but this is a good, what is the highest number of days of hours of sunlight in the country? They talked about the equinox and all. I mean, they were just going, I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I'd be sitting there watching them come up with things that I didn't know. Now I knew the calculus, but I didn't bring the context they brought.
But that's the work that Lee Stiff had done for so many
Yes.
years. Lee would tell you, you got to get a good story.
That's right.
If you know the mathematics, you can insert the math in the story.
Mhm.
So he would start off with a story about, how do you pick your first car, right? Because the kids are interested in the car. But he can do all the stuff with the gears, with the ratio and the proportions. He said the algebra can be fit into that story, but the story provides, again, the context.
I'm gonna watch. I just want to be so respectful of our time. I hate to cut anybody off. I'm sorry, Ashford. Want me to let you finish?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just simply want to thank you all. We're just a little bit over time right now, and there are so many more questions. I cannot wait to dig back in with you all on Saturday. These ideas of context and the comfort of letting go of control and where power lies in a classroom. I'm sure that when our teachers watch this video, it will probably create a lot more questions for you all, and we'll meet again on Saturday and we'll discuss that as a group. I cannot thank you all enough for your time and sharing your wisdom so generously. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Good to see you.
It has been my honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you on Saturday.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.